Sometimes you meet someone and think you've hit the jackpot, only to find out they've been playing a completely different game the whole time. I'm Morgan. I'm 33. And I just learned that lesson the hard way 2 years ago. I was at this charity gala downtown, one of those stuffy events where rich people write checks to feel better about themselves. I'd done my homework beforehand, researching the guest list like I was studying for finals. That's where I spotted Ezra Thompson, 38, tech consultant who'd sold his startup 5 years earlier for $4, $2 million after taxes. Not billionaire money, but enough that I wouldn't have to worry about rent ever again. He wasn't much to look at. I'll be real with you. Receding hairline. Wore khakis to a black tie event, and had this nervous laugh when he told programming jokes that made 0 sense. But when I looked at him, all I could see were dollar signs. So I made my move. That's an interesting perspective on data analytics, I said, sliding up to him at the bar, even though I had no clue what he'd just said to the guy next to him. His whole face lit up like I'd just told him he won the lottery. You work in tech. Pharmaceutical sales. I lied smoothly. Well, half lied. I had worked in pharmaceutical sales until 8 months earlier when they fired me for padding my expense reports. But he didn't need to know that. I deal with a lot of data tracking. We talked for hours. He was so eager to impress me, explaining his company sale like he was apologizing for having money. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about how I could quit worrying about my maxed out credit cards and my parents constantly asking when I'd get my life together. The best part? He had no idea how to read women. When I laughed at his terrible jokes and touched his arm, he thought it was genuine attraction. When I mentioned struggling to make my BMW payments, he offered to help without me even asking. This was going to be easier than I thought. We started dating officially a week later. I played the perfect girlfriend, interested in his boring hobbies, supportive of his consulting work, even pretended to care when he talked about his stupid coding projects for hours. He was so grateful for the attention. It was almost pathetic, but pathetic with millions in the bank, so I could deal with it. 6 months in, when things got serious, he told me about the startup money. He was so nervous, like he was confessing to murder instead of being rich. I hope this doesn't change things between us, he said. Change things. It changed everything. Suddenly, his boring personality didn't matter. His receding hairline was distinguished. His terrible fashion sense was endearing. I told him I was relieved he wasn't after my money, which was hilarious considering I was drowning in debt. The truth is, I'd been living off credit cards and my parents' help since losing my job. That $30K in savings I bragged about, that was actually $30K in debt spread across multiple cards. But Ezra saw my BMW lease and my designer clothes and assumed I had my shit together financially. A year in, I suggested moving in together. It just makes sense. I told him, we're always at each other's places anyway. What made sense was cutting my expenses in half while I figured out how to access his money permanently. Living with him was tolerable. He was neat, paid for everything without complaint, and never questioned my spending. The only annoying part was how modest he lived despite being loaded. We stayed in his regular 3-bedroom house instead of buying a mansion. He drove a Tesla, but it wasn't even the expensive model. He shopped at Target. For crying out loud, I started dropping hints about our future together. How nice it would be to have financial security. How we could travel the world. Buy a bigger house. He'd nod along. But nothing changed. It was like he was determined to live like a middle-class nobody when we could be living like royalty. That's when my sister Vanessa and I came up with Operation Goldmine. We researched divorce laws, calculated potential settlements, figured out the optimal timeline for maximum payout. 2 years of marriage was the sweet spot. Long enough to claim I'd sacrificed career opportunities for him. Not so long that I'd waste my 30s on his boring ass. We made spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets with different scenarios and payout calculations. If I could get half his assets, I'd walk away with over $2 million. Enough to live comfortably while I figured out what I actually wanted to do with my life. 18 months into our relationship, he proposed, finally. It wasn't romantic, he did it at home on a Tuesday night. Probably because he was too cheap to plan something special. But I said yes because I could practically see the finish line. Then came the wedding planning, and I went into full performance mode. I played the blushing bride, posting about our love story on social media, talking about how excited I was to be his wife. My friends ate it up, commenting about how lucky I was to find someone who loved me for me, if they only knew. 3 months before the wedding, he brought up the prenup. I was picking out flowers when he just casually mentioned it over dinner. We should probably get a prenup, he said, cutting into his chicken like he was discussing the weather. Standard stuff, protecting both our assets. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. This wasn't part of the plan. A prenup? Seriously. It's just practical. You have assets too. I almost laughed. My assets. I had a car loan and debt collectors calling twice a week. Ezra, if you loved me, you wouldn't need a legal document. His expression shifted, and I could see him wavering. Time to bring out the big guns. I let my eyes fill with tears. This is about you not trusting me. That's not what I meant. My assets. I stood up, letting my voice crack. I have a car loan and maybe $30,000 in savings. You have millions. You're trying to protect your money from me. The tears came easier now, mixed with real panic. A prenup would ruin everything. All those months of pretending to laugh at his jokes, of listening to him talk about server configurations, of letting him touch me when I'd rather be anywhere else. It would all be for nothing. I called my mom, sobbing into the phone loud enough for him to hear. He wants me to sign a prenup. Mom. He doesn't trust me. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up. My mom called him directly, screaming about how he was breaking her daughter's heart with his greed. My friends started texting him about how real love doesn't need contracts. Vanessa posted on Facebook about men who use prenups to control women. I watched him crumble under the pressure. He kept trying to explain that it was just practical. But every time he opened his mouth, I'd start crying again. Finally, I delivered the ultimatum. If you make me sign a prenup, I'll know you never really loved me. I'll call off the wedding. I sat there with tears streaming down my face, watching him process the choice I'd given him. Sign the prenup and lose me, or trust me and keep his perfect girlfriend. He looked at my tear-stained face and made his decision. You're absolutely right, he said quietly. If I really love you, I should trust you completely. The relief was overwhelming. I threw my arms around him, called him my soulmate, immediately posted on social media about how we were choosing love over lawyers. The comments poured in. People praising us for being a real couple, for showing that true love conquers all. That night, while I was celebrating with wine and calling venues to finalize details, I had no idea that Ezra was in his office making phone calls of his own. Over the next 6 weeks, I was in wedding planning heaven. I picked out the perfect dress, booked the most expensive photographer, chose a menu that cost more per plate than most people spend on groceries in a week's. Ezra paid for everything without complaint. I quit my job. Well, I told him I quit my job since I'd been unemployed for months anyway. I want to focus on being the best wife I can be, I said. He thought it was sweet. The only weird thing was how he started making changes. First, he traded in his Tesla for some boring Honda Civic. When I asked why, he said he wanted to be more practical, save money for our future. I thought it was annoying, but figured I could upgrade his car once we were married and I had access to everything. Then he mentioned selling the house. I'm thinking we should downsize, he said one morning over coffee. Start fresh somewhere smaller. I was confused, but tried to be supportive. Whatever makes you happy. Babe, we can always buy our dream house later. He smiled and nodded, but something felt off. Still, the house sold quickly to a cash buyer, and we moved into a rental apartment. He said it was temporary while we figured out what we wanted long term. 2 weeks before the wedding, he surprised me with the sweetest gesture. We were having dinner when he reached across the table and took my hand. I've been thinking about what you said, about trust. What about it? You're right. We should go into this marriage as complete equals. I want to add you to my bank accounts now, before the wedding. Because I trust you. My heart practically exploded. This was it. This was what I'd been working toward for 2 years. Really, really. In fact, why wait? Let's go to the bank tomorrow. I was so excited I could barely sleep. I called my mom immediately. He's adding me to everything. See, I told you he'd come around? The next morning, I dressed carefully for our bank appointment. Designer purse, fresh manicure, the works. This was going to be the day my life changed forever. We sat down with the banker, and I tried to contain my excitement as she pulled up Ezra's accounts. So you'd like to add Morgan as a joint account holder on all accounts? She asked. Yes, everything, Ezra said. The banker's fingers clicked across her keyboard. Then she paused, looking at her screen with a slight frown. Let me just verify these balances. She said, checking account shows $40. No. Savings account shows $0. My smile faltered. That couldn't be right. What about his investments? Ezra shifted in his seat. I moved everything around recently. Diversified. Most of it's tied up now. Tied up where the words came out sharper than I intended. Various things. Retirement accounts mostly. I can't touch any of it for decades. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, my hands shaking as I dialed my mom's number. There's nothing, I whispered into the phone. He says it's all in retirement accounts. That's impossible. You said he had millions. I know what I said, but there's only $40 000 in checking and nothing else. When I came back, I forced a smile. Well, 40,000 was a great start for us, but that evening, everything changed. Ezra seemed different, distant. I tried to bring up wedding planning, but he kept deflecting. I've been thinking, I said carefully, maybe we should postpone the wedding, just until we get our finances sorted out. He looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. Actually, I've been thinking the same thing, he said. Maybe we should have a prenup after all, just to be clear about everything. My blood pressure spiked. But you said love doesn't need contracts. I know what I said. But I want to understand our complete financial picture. Do you have any other accounts I should know about? Offshore, maybe? Why would I have offshore accounts? That sounds like something from movies. But he kept pushing, asking questions about my finances, my job, my savings. I got defensive because what was I supposed to say? That I'd been lying about everything from day one. Don't play dumb with me. I finally snapped. I know you have money somewhere. What did you do with the millions? His face went completely cold, and I thought you said you didn't care about the millions. That you loved me. Not my money. That's when I knew I'd been played. Somehow, this boring, pathetic man had outmaneuvered me, but I wasn't going down without a fight. I called his attorney's office, demanding to know where my money was hidden. The receptionist was polite but firm. They couldn't discuss client information without permission. I hung up and immediately called Ezra, screaming, "You think you're so smart? Hiding assets before marriage is illegal. I'll sue you for fraud." "We're not married yet," he said calmly. "I can do whatever I want with my money." That's when I played what I thought was my ace card. "I'm pregnant." He actually laughed at me. I had a vasectomy 5 years ago. Try again. The line went dead, and I realized I just destroyed any remaining credibility I had. But I wasn't finished. If he wanted to play games, I'd show him what real games looked like. I hired Keith Morrison, a lawyer who specialized in what he called women's financial justice. He was expensive, but my parents agreed to help pay for it after I explained how Ezra had manipulated and deceived me. Keith filed a civil suit for breach of promise, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and financial domestic abuse. We demanded $2, $1 million, exactly half of what I knew he'd had. Financial domestic abuse is a new legal theory, Keith explained. We're arguing that he systematically impoverished himself to deny you marital assets you were entitled to, but we never got married. That's what makes this creative. We're breaking new ground here. The discovery process was supposed to work in our favor. We'd get to see all his financial records, prove he was hiding money, but discovery goes both ways. And that's where things started falling apart. They found out about my job, how I'd been fired 8 months before I met Ezra for expense fraud, how I'd been living on credit cards and my parents' money ever since, how that $30K in savings was actually $30K in debt. But the worst part was the emails. Somehow they got access to my correspondence with Vanessa about Operation Goldmine. Every spreadsheet, every calculation, every strategy session about how to maximize my divorce settlement. It was all there in black and white. Robert Chen, Ezra's attorney, seemed almost amused when he called Keith to discuss settlement. "Your client researched my client's net worth before they even met," he said during a conference call I was listening in on. "She planned this relationship like a business transaction, and now she's surprised that he protected himself." Keith tried to argue that the emails were taken out of context. But how do you take Operation Goldmine out of context? The trial was a disaster from the moment I walked into the courtroom. I'd worn my best designer outfit, a $2 000 suit I'd bought on credit specifically for this moment. I wanted to look like someone who deserved millions. The judge was an older woman who looked like she'd seen every scam in the book. She listened to Keith's opening argument about financial abuse and emotional manipulation with increasing skepticism. "Miss Mitchell," she said during my testimony, "did Mr. Thompson force you to refuse a prenuptial agreement? He manipulated me into thinking he trusted me." "How exactly did he manipulate you?" I tried to explain about the emotional pressure, the way he made me feel guilty for wanting financial security. But every answer made me sound worse. "So he agreed with your position that love doesn't need contracts?" "Yes. But, and you have text messages saying you don't care about money." That was different. You were trying to what? "Miss Mitchell?" I couldn't answer that without admitting the whole thing had been a setup from the beginning. Then Robert presented the trust documents. An irrevocable offshore trust established 6 months before our wedding. 3 weeks after I'd refused the prenup, Ezra had liquidated everything. House, investments, retirement accounts, and put it all beyond anyone's reach, including his own. "Your Honor," Robert explained, "my client is now a beneficiary of this trust. not an owner. He receives $4.00 monthly, which cannot be increased or accessed in a lump sum even by him. The trust is administered by trustees in the Cook Islands. It's no different than if his parents had set up a trust for him as a child. The judge studied the documents carefully. So even if I wanted to award Miss Mitchell money from this trust, it would be legally impossible. Correct. Your Honor, the trust is completely separate from my client. He has no control over it. I watched my dreams crumble as the judge explained her ruling. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Not only was I getting nothing, but I was ordered to pay $50. $0 in damages for defamation and fraud. I lost it. Actually screamed in the courtroom. He owes me. I wasted 2 years of my life. Miss Mitchell, the judge said sternly, you wasted your own time running what appears to be an elaborate financial con. Count yourself lucky I'm not referring this to the district attorney for criminal fraud charges. My mom stood up in the gallery, shouting about injustice, until the bailiff escorted her out. It's been 4 months since the trial, and my life has completely fallen apart. I filed for bankruptcy within a week to avoid paying the judgment. My credit is destroyed. My BMW got repossessed, and I'm living in my childhood bedroom at 33 years old. The criminal charges came anyway. Turns out the expense fraud from my old job caught up with me during discovery. I'm looking at possible jail time and definitely won't be working in pharmaceutical sales again. My friends have all disappeared. Turns out people don't want to associate with someone who got exposed as a gold-digging fraud in open court. Even Vanessa barely talks to me anymore, claiming she was just supporting her sister and didn't really mean all those things in the emails. Ezra, meanwhile, is apparently doing great. I've driven by his apartment a few times, and he seems perfectly content with his simple life. He bought a used bicycle and rides it to the coffee shop every morning. He looks peaceful, like he's finally free from something that was weighing him down. I keep texting him from different numbers, trying to get him to respond. Sometimes I threaten to hurt myself. Sometimes I claim I'm pregnant with someone else's baby and need help. Sometimes I try to convince him we can work things out. He never responds, but I know he's reading them. My parents are getting tired of supporting me. They've started making comments about me needing to take responsibility and figure out my life. They're talking about giving me a deadline to move out. The worst part is how everyone acts like I'm the one who did something wrong. Like I'm some kind of criminal for wanting financial security. Ezra had millions just sitting there, doing nothing. Why shouldn't I have gotten some of it? I gave him 2 years of my life, pretended to love him, made him feel special. That has to be worth something. But apparently the legal system doesn't see it that way. Apparently wanting a better life makes me a fraud and a con artist. Apparently protecting yourself from someone like me makes you smart and justified. Fine. Maybe I did plan the whole thing. Maybe I never loved him. But he knew what he was getting into when he agreed to marry me without a prenup. He could have insisted on protecting his assets, but he chose to trust me instead. That's on him, not me. I'm not apologizing for wanting more than a life of struggling to pay bills and wondering where my next meal is coming from. I'm not apologizing for seeing an opportunity and taking it. And I'm definitely not apologizing for being smarter than all those other women who marry for love and end up with nothing when it falls apart. The only thing I'm sorry about is that I wasn't smart enough to see through his act. He played me better than I played him. And now I'm the one paying the price? But this isn't over. I'm working on an appeal, and Keith thinks we might have grounds for a civil rights violation. Apparently there's precedent for financial abuse cases, and we just need to find the right angle. Ezra thinks he's won, but he doesn't know me very well. I didn't spend 2 years planning Operation Goldmine just to give up because of one setback. He wants to live on $4.00 a month for the rest of his life. Fine, but I'm not done fighting for what I deserve.